Jack Miller never expected that one rainy night on the bridge would change his life forever. The sound of water slapping against the pavement and the distant hum of passing cars filled the air as he noticed the sleek black sedan pulled over with smoke curling from the front tire. Victoria Harper, a woman impeccably dressed even in the downpour, was standing beside her car, frowning at her phone with a frustrated sigh. The storm soaked his worn jacket, but he did not hesitate. He jogged toward the vehicle, hands already reaching for the spare tire kit in his backpack, determined to help despite his freezing fingers and the puddles soaking through his sneakers. He caught her gaze, wide with a mixture of relief and disbelief, as if she had not expected anyone to stop. "Are you all right? Do you need some help?" he called, his voice steady over the sound of rain. She nodded, momentarily speechless, before handing him the tire iron. He worked quickly, muscles tensing with effort as the cold rain soaked him to the bone, and for a moment, all he could hear was the rhythmic patter of water and the occasional honk from a passing truck. The spare tire was mounted, the lug nuts tightened, and Jack finally stepped back, brushing wet hair from his eyes. Victoria exhaled sharply, finally able to speak. "I do not even know how to thank you," she said, her voice catching with emotion. Jack shrugged, a faint smile crossing his face. "It is no problem. You should not be standing out here in the rain alone." Her eyes lingered on him, noticing the fatigue etched into his youthful features, the calloused hands that had just performed a task most would shy away from. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you cannot miss. After a brief pause, Victoria suggested they move to the small diner across the street to dry off and warm up with coffee. Jack hesitated, conscious of his modest clothing and the grime from the wet pavement, but her insistence and worried look finally persuaded him. Inside, the diner smelled of fresh coffee and toasted bread, and the warm glow of the lights contrasted sharply with the cold gray world outside. They sat across from each other in a booth, and the conversation started cautiously, each word measured, yet revealing small glimpses of their personalities. Victoria spoke of her hectic day, business meetings that had run late, and the frustration of her unexpected car trouble, while Jack shared his own modest struggles, working part-time jobs to pay for school and rent. Even in the dim light and the ordinary diner setting, there was an unmistakable spark of connection, a sense that this encounter was more than mere chance. He noticed the way her hand trembled slightly as she stirred her coffee and the way her eyes softened when she laughed at one of his dry remarks. The storm outside continued unabated, but inside that small booth, a different warmth had begun to grow, a tentative bond formed from a simple act of kindness that neither of them could have anticipated. The next morning, Jack woke to the soft light of his small apartment filtering through the thin curtains, the distant sound of traffic and occasional honks of cars punctuating the quiet. He had not slept well, his mind replaying the events on the bridge over and over. The memory of Victoria Harper standing there, soaked to the bone, with her expression a mixture of frustration and relief, kept him awake far longer than he wanted. He dressed quickly, pulling on his worn sneakers and a hoodie over his thin shirt, and grabbed his backpack before heading out into the cool morning air. The streets were damp, the puddles reflecting the pale sunlight as he walked toward his part-time job at the local hardware store, his thoughts still tangled with the previous night. Each step felt heavier as he considered how different his life was from the woman he had helped. She lived in a world of polished concrete, high-rise buildings, and sleek cars, while he navigated cracked sidewalks, subway stairs, and the constant pressure of unpaid bills. Yet, the memory of her eyes, wide and grateful, reminded him that his act of kindness had made a real difference, and somehow that gave him a small spark of pride. Meanwhile, Victoria sat in her penthouse apartment, the city sprawling beneath her like a tapestry of motion and light. She could not shake the image of the young man who had stopped in the rain, drenched and shivering, to help her with something as ordinary yet essential as a flat tire. Her mind wandered, back to the moment she had handed him the tire iron, watching him work with skill and determination, hands moving quickly despite the soaking rain. She had expected a passerby to glance and keep walking, or perhaps someone to offer a fleeting word of concern before vanishing into the storm. But not this. He had stayed, focused and unwavering, and it had stirred something in her that she could not name. Her assistant had been trying to schedule back-to-back meetings all morning, but Victoria found herself staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows, sipping coffee slowly, and thinking about the boy who had appeared out of nowhere. She wondered about his life, his dreams, the pressures he might face, and why someone like him, who had so little in material wealth, could show such generosity without hesitation. As the hours passed, the city moved in its usual rhythm. People commuting, the occasional honk of taxis, the flutter of birds in the trees along the avenue. But Victoria felt suspended in her own world, caught between her responsibilities and the curiosity she could not shake. Jack, on the other hand, spent his day navigating the hardware store, helping customers with various projects, repairing tools, and carrying heavy boxes. Each time his thoughts drifted to Victoria, he felt a strange combination of excitement and nervousness. He questioned himself, wondering if someone from her world would ever notice him beyond the kindness he had shown. Still, he could not deny the thrill that had settled in his chest, the unexpected warmth that had replaced the shivering chill from the previous night. As evening approached, Jack walked home through the quiet streets, the sky painted in hues of orange and gray, and considered whether he would ever see Victoria again. He did not know how, when, or even if he should try, but the thought of her smile and the earnest way she had thanked him fueled a determination he did not fully understand. At the same time, Victoria found a moment to pause in her office before the end of the workday, looking at a small stack of notes and reminders, but unable to focus. She picked up her phone, thinking about whether she should reach out to the young man who had unexpectedly disrupted her night, and yet filled it with a sense of gratitude and curiosity she could not ignore. Both unaware that their paths were about to cross once more. The events of the bridge had left a mark that neither could dismiss, and an invisible thread seemed to stretch between them, pulling them toward a second encounter that promised to be as unpredictable and compelling as the first. Jack spent the following morning rushing through his routine, the streets still wet from the previous night's rain, puddles reflecting the pale daylight as he carried boxes and restocked shelves of the hardware store. His muscles ached from lifting, and his fingers were sore from twisting screws and handling metal tools. Yet he moved with quiet determination, keeping his mind partially occupied with thoughts of Victoria Harper. Each time a customer asked him for assistance, he responded with patience and a slight smile, but his thoughts wandered, imagining her sitting in her high-rise apartment, sipping coffee and perhaps thinking about him. The contrast between their worlds was stark, and he could not shake the awareness of his own modest life. Cramped apartment, thin mattress, meals made from whatever he could afford, and part-time jobs that barely covered rent. He wondered if someone like Victoria could ever genuinely connect with someone like him without seeing the gap between them first. Meanwhile, Victoria sat in her sleek penthouse office, overlooking the city streets below, reviewing spreadsheets and emails while a cup of coffee cooled beside her. Despite the opulence and control of her environment, she felt a strange emptiness that she had not experienced before, a subtle ache that reminded her that wealth did not equate to fulfillment. Her mind repeatedly returned to Jack, the young man who had appeared out of nowhere in the rain and helped her without expectation. She remembered his soaked hoodie, the way he had wiped his face with the back of his hand, and the earnest look in his eyes that conveyed sincerity and kindness. She could not help but smile quietly, realizing that for the first time in a long while, she had been seen not for her status or her possessions, but for the human being she was. As the day continued, Jack's co-workers teased him lightly about his distracted demeanor, noticing the faraway look in his eyes as he stacked boxes and organized tools. He forced a polite laugh, not wanting to draw attention, and continued with his work, but inside, he felt a growing tension. Between the excitement of the previous night and the anxiety about the impossible differences in their lives. By late afternoon, his shift ended, and Jack walked along the damp sidewalks, breathing in the crisp air as the wind lifted loose strands of his hair. The thought of Victoria lingered, and he debated whether he should ever attempt to reach out, unsure if it would be welcomed or if it was simply a fleeting encounter destined to fade. At the same time, Victoria made a decision of her own, instructing her assistant to see if he could find the young man who had helped her, using only the limited information she had from the bridge encounter. She felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness, wondering how someone from a completely different world might respond if contacted. That evening, Jack returned to his small apartment, preparing a simple meal of soup and bread, the faint sound of traffic and distant voices filling the quiet spaces of his modest home. He sat by the window, staring out at the city lights, reflecting on how a single act of kindness could create ripples that reached far beyond what he could see. The memory of Victoria's eyes, the soft way she had spoken her gratitude, and the unspoken connection that had passed between them filled him with an uneasy hope. Across town, Victoria placed her coffee down and looked out at the skyline again, thinking about the young man who had made her feel unexpectedly human in the midst of her structured and controlled life. Both of them, separate yet connected by the events of the previous night, were unaware that their paths were about to cross again, and that the choices made in the coming hours would begin to shape a story neither could have anticipated. Victoria Harper had spent the day attending meetings, reviewing reports, and coordinating with her staff, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the young man who had helped her on the bridge. The image of Jack Miller standing in the rain, drenched yet focused entirely on fixing her flat tire, remained vivid in her mind. She could not shake the sense that he was different from anyone she had ever met, someone whose actions were guided by genuine care rather than social expectation or gain. Determined to learn more, she instructed her assistant to try to locate him, providing only the details she remembered: a young man, early 20s, wearing a soaked hoodie and carrying a backpack, who had been at the bridge near the corner diner last night. Meanwhile, Jack continued with his life, unaware that he was the subject of a quiet search. He returned home after a long day, exhausted from work at the hardware store, and sat by the window of his small apartment, staring at the city lights. The memory of Victoria's expression, both grateful and uncertain, lingered, and he found himself questioning whether he would ever see her again. His modest surroundings, the peeling paint on the walls, and the thin mattress on his bed served as a constant reminder of the gulf between their worlds, yet the thought of her stayed with him, warming him in a way that nothing else had. That evening, he decided to take a walk to clear his mind, passing familiar streets and the small coffee shop where he sometimes stopped on his way home from work. The cool air bit at his face, and he adjusted the hood of his jacket, glancing at the puddles reflecting the flickering streetlights. Across town, Victoria took a rare moment for herself in the quiet of her penthouse, sipping tea as she looked down at the bustling streets below. She reflected on the contrast between her life, filled with luxury and endless responsibilities, and the simplicity of Jack's world. The fact that someone could show such kindness without expectation fascinated her, and she felt compelled to see him again. Late in the afternoon, Jack decided to help an elderly neighbor with a broken gate, using skills he had learned working odd jobs around the city. His movements were careful and precise, and though the work was tiring, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He did not realize that a small car with tinted windows had paused across the street, and that Victoria, having tracked the area near the bridge, had arrived to observe from a distance. She watched him, noting the way he interacted with the neighbor, his patience, and the thoughtful manner in which he explained the repair process. The sight confirmed her impression that he was sincere and compassionate, qualities she had not expected to find in someone so far removed from her own world. Jack finished the work and waved goodbye to the neighbor, feeling a sense of accomplishment, and began walking home under the soft glow of the street lamps. Victoria approached cautiously, making sure he saw her without startling him. When he turned and noticed her presence, his eyes widened slightly, a mixture of surprise and cautious curiosity crossing his face. I hope I'm not intruding," she said with a gentle smile, holding out a hand as if to bridge the distance between their worlds. Jack hesitated for a moment, the memory of last night and the differences between them flooding his mind, before offering a tentative smile and extending his own hand. The brief handshake held a weight of acknowledgement, a silent recognition that their lives were about to intersect again in ways neither could yet fully understand. As they stood on the quiet street, the city around them moving in its usual rhythm, both felt a sense of anticipation and nervous excitement, the promise of new possibilities hanging between them, as the evening air carried the faint scent of rain and the distant sounds of the city. The next morning, Jack awoke with the memory of last evening still fresh in his mind, the faint sound of city traffic filtering through the thin walls of his apartment. He stretched, feeling the soreness in his arms and legs from the previous day's work, and dressed quickly in worn jeans and a comfortable shirt before heading out into the crisp morning air. The streets were quiet at this hour, the occasional delivery truck rumbling past as he made his way to the local diner where he often grabbed a quick breakfast before his shift at the hardware store. He paused briefly at the corner, looking up at the skyline, and wondered if he would see Victoria again, unsure if it was even appropriate to reach out. Across town, Victoria Harper began her day with a brisk walk through her neighborhood, the morning sun reflecting off the glass windows of the surrounding buildings. She carried a small notebook in which she had scribbled the few details she could remember about Jack Miller, his approximate age, his clothing from the previous evening, and the street where he had helped her. Her assistant had already begun a quiet search, asking around the diner and checking nearby streets. But Victoria felt a restlessness that would not allow her to wait passively. She wanted to see him for herself, to understand the young man whose unexpected kindness had left a mark on her. Later that day, Jack arrived at the diner and ordered a cup of coffee, the aroma warm and comforting, a stark contrast to the damp chill outside. As he sipped the drink, he noticed a figure entering the diner with confident, measured steps, carrying the presence of someone accustomed to control and attention. Victoria paused near the doorway, scanning the room with intent, and when her eyes met Jack's, a quiet smile formed on her lips. Jack's heart skipped a beat, a mixture of surprise and anticipation stirring within him. She approached the counter first, greeting the barista with calm familiarity, and then turned toward him. "Good morning," she said softly, her tone carrying a warmth that made the morning light feel brighter. "I hope I am not interrupting your day." Jack shook his head, feeling a combination of excitement and nervousness. "Not at all," he replied, his voice steady though his hands fidgeted slightly. They found a small booth near the window, the glass fogged slightly from the contrast between the diner's warmth and the cool air outside. Conversation began cautiously, tentative questions about each other's routines and lives, but gradually the dialogue deepened. Victoria spoke about the demands of her work, the constant pressure to make decisions that affected hundreds of people, and the loneliness that often accompanied her position. Jack shared stories of his part-time work, the challenge of paying rent and tuition, and the small victories that kept him moving forward despite the struggle. Both found themselves laughing softly at the small absurdities of their respective days, the sound mingling with the quiet hum of the diner. As the morning progressed, they lingered over their drinks, neither wanting to leave, both aware that the encounter held significance beyond the ordinary. The sunlight streaming through the window caught the edges of Victoria's hair, highlighting the subtle expression of curiosity and interest in her eyes, while Jack found himself noticing the intensity and depth of her gaze, a window into a world he had only glimpsed briefly. By the time they stood to leave, a tentative plan to meet again hung unspoken in the air, both feeling the quiet thrill of possibility and the anticipation of a story just beginning to unfold between them. The city around them continued its rhythm, but within the small diner, a connection had been forged that neither time nor circumstance could easily diminish, a bond built on mutual respect, curiosity, and the memory of one rainy night on the bridge. Later that afternoon, Jack found himself wandering through the small parking lot behind the corner hardware store, the sun dipping low behind the buildings and casting long shadows across the asphalt. He had just finished helping an elderly couple unload a bulk order of supplies, his arms sore and his clothes slightly damp from the exertion. As he paused to catch his breath, he noticed a familiar figure approaching from across the lot. Victoria Harper walked toward him, her posture relaxed yet confident, carrying the same composed presence he remembered from the diner and the bridge. She smiled warmly, and Jack felt a flutter of nerves in his chest, a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. "Hi, Jack," she said, her voice carrying over the quiet sounds of the parking lot. "I was hoping to run into you again." Jack shifted slightly, brushing his hands on his jeans, unsure how to respond. "Hello, Victoria," he replied, his voice steady though his mind raced. "I did not expect to see you here." She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to blend with the faint rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. "I thought I would find you. I wanted to thank you properly for your help last night," she explained, her eyes attentive, observing his reaction carefully. Jack felt a sense of hesitation, thinking of the differences in their worlds, the vast gap between her polished lifestyle and his modest existence. "It was nothing," he said, trying to downplay the impact of his actions, though internally he could not deny the satisfaction he felt in helping her. Victoria tilted her head slightly, a knowing expression crossing her face. "I did not believe it was nothing. You were kind, and that is rare," she said, her tone both gentle and sincere. They began to walk together slowly across the lot, the soft glow of the late afternoon sun reflecting off the nearby windows. Their conversation started cautiously, covering small talk about the day, the weather, and mundane details, but gradually it deepened as Victoria shared a story about a charity event she had attended, highlighting the struggles of people less fortunate than herself. Jack listened intently, contributing his own thoughts about the challenges of living paycheck to paycheck, working odd jobs, and trying to pursue his education simultaneously. As they reached the edge of the lot, Jack noticed a small coffee shop nearby, and Victoria suggested they step inside for a warm drink. The interior was cozy, filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods, and the hum of quiet conversation created a comforting backdrop for their dialogue. They chose a corner booth, and, as they sat down, the conversation became more personal. Victoria inquired about his family, his studies, and his aspirations, and Jack shared his modest ambitions, explaining how he hoped to one day start a small business or build a better future for himself and his loved ones. Victoria listened attentively, her eyes reflecting genuine interest, and she shared her own experiences, the pressures of managing a company, and the rare moments when she could connect with someone on a human level without the barriers of wealth or status. The hours seemed to pass unnoticed, the light outside shifting toward the soft hues of early evening. Both felt a sense of comfort and curiosity growing between them, an unspoken understanding that this encounter was different from ordinary interactions. Jack realized that for the first time in a long while, he was being seen for who he was, not for his limitations or his lack of wealth, and Victoria felt a quiet excitement at meeting someone whose character shone through without pretense. As they stood to leave, a subtle tension lingered in the air, a mixture of anticipation and the unspoken question of what would come next. They walked out together, side by side, the fading sunlight casting long shadows that intertwined like the beginnings of a connection neither had yet fully comprehended, but both were eager to explore. Jack Miller felt a strange mix of anticipation and apprehension as he followed Victoria Harper into the tall glass building she called her office. The lobby was sleek and polished, with marble floors reflecting the late afternoon sun and the soft hum of air conditioning creating an almost serene atmosphere. Jack's eyes wandered, taking in the minimalist decor, the sharp lines of the furniture, and the quiet efficiency of the staff moving purposefully between meetings and appointments. He felt out of place in his worn jeans and hoodie, a stark contrast to the tailored suits and polished shoes of the people around him. Yet Victoria walked beside him with a calm assurance that made the transition seem less intimidating. As they entered an elevator and rose several floors, Victoria glanced at him with a subtle smile. "You do not have to worry about fitting in here," she said softly. "I just want you to see where I work and understand a little more about my world." Jack nodded, feeling both nervous and curious. When the elevator doors opened onto the top floor, He was led through a series of hallways until they reached a large office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city below. Sunlight streamed in, casting a warm glow over the polished wooden desk and the carefully arranged books and papers. Victoria gestured toward a small seating area with comfortable chairs. "Please have a seat," she said. Jack settled into one of the chairs, his hands resting on his knees as he tried to take in the enormity of the space and the precision with which it was maintained. Victoria moved to her desk, pulling out a small stack of documents and setting them on the polished surface. She then sat down, facing him with a seriousness that made him sit up straighter. "Jack, there is something I should tell you," she began, her tone measured but tinged with a hint of apprehension. "I'm not just the woman you met on the bridge last night. I am a chief executive officer of Harper Enterprises. I realize this may be surprising, but I wanted you to know because I believe it is important for you to understand the context of our interactions." Jack felt his stomach tighten, a mixture of shock and disbelief washing over him. He stared at her, trying to process the revelation, the image of the soaked, frustrated woman on the bridge replaced now with the composed, confident executive before him. I did not know," he stammered, finding it difficult to find the right words. Victoria nodded, acknowledging his reaction. "I understand this is a lot to take in. I did not want my position to influence how you felt about me or how I felt about you. Your actions were genuine, and that is why I am telling you now." Jack's mind raced as he recalled the events of the previous evening. The rain, the flat tire, the way he had worked quickly and efficiently to help her. He realized that despite the vast differences in their worlds, there had been a genuine connection, a recognition of character that had nothing to do with status or wealth. Victoria leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest. "I'm sharing this because I trust you and because I want you to continue to see me as the person I am, not the title I hold. Last night was not about business or appearances. It was about two people, a moment of kindness, and what that can mean." Jack exhaled slowly, feeling a weight lift from his chest. The initial shock began to give way to a mixture of relief and curiosity. He understood that her revelation did not change the sincerity of their interaction. Rather, it added a new dimension to it. He realized that the choices he made, the simple act of helping someone in need, had led him to a moment of profound significance. As the conversation continued, Victoria shared more about her daily responsibilities, the pressures of managing a large enterprise, and the isolation that often accompanied her role. Jack listened attentively, occasionally asking questions and offering his perspective, the dialogue deepening the connection that had begun on the bridge. By the time they concluded their meeting, both felt a sense of mutual respect and understanding, a recognition that despite the social and economic gap between them, there existed a foundation for trust and perhaps the beginnings of something more meaningful. As they left the office together, walking down the marble-floored lobby toward the street below, Jack felt a renewed sense of possibility, and Victoria felt a quiet satisfaction that she had shared the truth with someone who had already proven himself to be sincere and kind, setting the stage for the unfolding of their shared story. Victoria Harper paused at the door of the small community center she had invited Jack to, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot. She had arranged for him to see the work of a local outreach program, a project designed to support underprivileged families and individuals struggling to make ends meet. Jack stepped out of his modest car, his hoodie still damp from the light drizzle earlier, and took a deep breath, the crisp air carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and the faint aroma of the city. He followed Victoria inside, noting the contrast between the polished office building he had visited the day before and the modest, bustling environment of the center. Children ran across the floor, laughing and playing with donated toys, while volunteers moved quickly to set up tables and organize supplies. Victoria smiled as she guided him through the space. "I wanted you to see this," she said softly, "because this is a part of my life that matters greatly to me. These programs provide support to people who are often overlooked, and I thought you might appreciate seeing the impact of small actions." Jack nodded, taking in the activity around him, and felt a familiar warmth in his chest. He had spent much of his life helping where he could, but the scale of this effort and the thought behind it struck him deeply. He watched as a young volunteer helped an elderly woman carry boxes of donated clothing. The effort simple, yet meaningful. Victoria noticed his gaze and followed it, her expression thoughtful. "You see," she said, "this is why I asked you here. You helped me when I was in need, without expectation, and I wanted you to understand that the kindness you showed is valued here as well. It can ripple outward in ways you may never realize." Jack felt a surge of humility and pride, realizing that his small act on the bridge had been part of a much larger tapestry of human connection. As they walked through the center, Victoria introduced him to staff and volunteers, and he noticed the genuine warmth and respect they offered her. It was clear that despite her title and wealth, she was seen not only as a leader, but also as a person committed to making a difference. Jack quietly assisted a volunteer by carrying a stack of blankets to a storage area, feeling the same satisfaction he had experienced the night before, the simple joy of helping without expectation. Victoria observed, her admiration for him growing with each gesture, noting how he interacted with people of all ages and backgrounds with patience, respect, and genuine interest. Later, they paused in a small garden adjacent to the building, where a few of the children were planting flowers with supervision for volunteers. Victoria turned to Jack, her tone serious but gentle. "I hope you understand, Jack, that I am offering you a place here, not because of who I am, but because I believe in the way you see the world and the care you show to others. This is an opportunity to continue making a difference, and I would be honored to have you participate." Jack felt a mixture of surprise, hesitation, and deep gratitude. The thought of working alongside Victoria, contributing to meaningful work, was both exciting and daunting. Yet, as he looked around at the smiling faces and the tangible results of small acts of kindness, he realized that he could rise to the challenge. "I would like that very much," he said finally, his voice steady, filled with sincerity. Victoria smiled, a sense of satisfaction and quiet triumph in her expression, knowing that she had found someone whose heart and actions aligned with the values she held most dear. They spent the remainder of the afternoon walking through the center, engaging with volunteers and participants, each step strengthening the connection between them and laying the foundation for a shared purpose and growing trust that neither had anticipated. Jack felt a sudden tension in the air as he arrived at the community center the following morning, the streets still damp from an overnight drizzle and the distant hum of city traffic punctuating the quiet. He had been preparing mentally for the day, wondering how his presence and participation might be perceived in the space Victoria had introduced him to, but he could not shake a growing unease. As he entered the main hall, he noticed a small group of staff members gathered near the reception, exchanging whispers and glances that carried an unmistakable note of skepticism. One of the volunteers, a tall woman with a clipboard, approached Jack cautiously. "Are you really here on your own? Or did someone ask you to participate for a reason?" she asked, her voice carrying just enough volume to be overheard by others nearby. Jack frowned slightly, realizing that his actions, though genuine, were being interpreted differently. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could explain, the group murmured among themselves, the tension growing as the words spread across the room. Victoria arrived shortly after, her expression alert and slightly concerned. She noticed the subtle shift in the atmosphere and immediately understood the cause. Approaching Jack, she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Jack, I know how. But I want you to trust me," she said softly, her voice calm yet firm, cutting through the low hum of gossip. He nodded, grateful for her presence, but the doubt and uncertainty lingered, gnawing at his confidence. The volunteers and staff had begun to eye him with suspicion, some clearly unconvinced that his intentions were pure. Jack took a deep breath, recalling the motivation that had brought him here in the first place. A desire to help without expectation, to make a tangible difference in the lives of others. He squared his shoulders and moved toward a group of children who were setting up tables for an afternoon workshop, offering to assist with carrying supplies and arranging chairs. The small gestures, his quiet competence, and his willingness to help slowly began to shift the room's perception. Victoria observed closely, her admiration growing as she watched Jack navigate the delicate balance of proving his integrity while remaining humble. She stepped forward, addressing the group with authority and warmth. "Everyone, I want to make it clear that Jack is here because I trust him and because he has shown remarkable kindness," she explained. "Please give him a chance to demonstrate his genuine intentions." The room gradually quieted, and Jack found himself able to focus on the work at hand. He engaged with the children, offering guidance and encouragement, and assisted staff with small tasks, each action reinforcing the sincerity of his character. By the end of the morning, the initial tension had begun to dissipate, replaced with a tentative acceptance and appreciation for his efforts. Victoria joined him briefly, smiling as he wiped sweat from his brow. "You handled that very well," she said. "I know it was not easy being misunderstood, but you stayed true to yourself." Jack smiled, a mix of relief and pride swelling within him. He realized that his genuine intentions had begun to bridge the gap not only between himself and the staff, but also between their worlds, laying the groundwork for trust and connection that extended beyond the immediate tasks. As they walked together through the hall, observing the children laughing and volunteers working diligently, both felt a quiet sense of accomplishment and anticipation for the days ahead, understanding that the challenges they had faced together were not obstacles, but stepping stones toward a deeper bond and mutual respect. By mid-afternoon, a tense silence had settled over the community center. Jack Miller moved quietly among the tables, distributing supplies and checking on the progress of the volunteers, yet he could feel the lingering suspicion from earlier in the day. Rumors had begun to circulate among some of the staff that he might be there for ulterior motives, perhaps seeking favor or recognition from Victoria Harper rather than contributing genuinely. The weight of these assumptions pressed on him, making each gesture feel scrutinized, and he found himself hesitating more than usual, second-guessing every word and action. Victoria, noticing the shift in energy, approached him with a steady gaze. "Jack, I see what is happening," she said softly, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You are not here to impress anyone, but to do what you came here to do, and I trust you completely. Do not let their doubts affect you." Jack exhaled, a mixture of frustration and relief crossing his features, grateful for her understanding and support. The day had become more than a simple volunteer effort. It had transformed into a delicate test of character, a challenge not of physical ability, but of integrity and patience. He took a deep breath, recalling the reason he had first helped her on the bridge, the simple act of kindness without expectation, and he let that anchor him as he continued to assist with the preparations for an afternoon program. Victoria moved among the staff and volunteers, subtly diffusing tension, clarifying the purpose of Jack's presence, and emphasizing the importance of teamwork and sincerity over appearances. Slowly, the atmosphere began to shift. Staff members who had been skeptical watched Jack interact with the children, showing patience, empathy, and attentiveness that could not be feigned. He guided a young boy through an activity, corrected mistakes gently, and celebrated small successes, all with a calm confidence that gradually won over the onlookers. The initial whispers faded as the volunteers began to recognize his genuine dedication, and by the time the program started in earnest, the mood in the room had lifted significantly. Victoria observed from the edge of the activity area, her admiration for Jack deepening as she saw him navigate the challenges of the day with grace and authenticity. She knew that the bonds he was forming with the children and volunteers were the result of true character, not circumstance. Jack, feeling the change in perception, relaxed into his role, no longer preoccupied with proving himself, but fully engaged in the work, offering encouragement, guidance, and small moments of attention that made a meaningful difference. As the afternoon drew to a close, Victoria approached him once more, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You see," she said quietly, "the truth always shows itself in actions, and yours have spoken louder than any rumor or assumption." Jack nodded, a sense of accomplishment and relief flooding through him, realizing that he had weathered the subtle tests of perception and had done so with integrity intact. They walked together toward the exit, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the parking lot, and both felt the quiet satisfaction of having faced challenges not of wealth or status, but of character and trust, a step that had brought them closer and strengthened the connection that had begun on the rainy bridge and continued to grow in unexpected ways throughout the day. The following morning, Jack woke with a renewed sense of purpose, the sunlight filtering through the thin curtains of his modest apartment and casting soft golden streaks across the floor. He dressed quickly in his usual jeans and comfortable shirt, taking a deep breath as he mentally prepared for the day ahead. The events of the previous day had left an impression on both him and Victoria Harper, and he felt a mixture of anticipation and cautious excitement as he stepped out into the crisp morning air. The streets were bustling with the usual rhythm of city life, the hum of cars, the occasional bark of a dog, and the chatter of pedestrians filling the background as he walked toward the community center. Victoria arrived shortly afterward, her presence calm yet commanding, the polished confidence she carried perfectly balanced with the warmth and sincerity he had come to appreciate. She greeted him with a smile that held both reassurance and subtle excitement. "Jack, I thought we could begin today by visiting one of our new outreach locations," she said, her tone inviting yet purposeful. Jack nodded, following her down a series of streets that led to a small neighborhood where the program had recently expanded to support more families. The streets were lined with modest homes and small businesses, a stark contrast to the sleek high-rise buildings Victoria inhabited. As they approached the center, a sense of anticipation hung in the air. Staff and volunteers were setting up tables, unpacking supplies, and preparing for the day's activities. Victoria turned to Jack, her expression earnest. "I want you to see how impactful small actions can be when combined with intention and care," she said. "The difference we make here is tangible, but it also depends on the people who choose to engage sincerely." Jack felt a deep resonance with her words. He had come to the center thinking his contributions would be small, yet he understood now that the authenticity of effort often mattered more than the scale of the action. As the day progressed, they worked side by side, helping to organize donations, setting up activity areas for children, and assisting families with the items they needed. Jack found himself immersed in the tasks, his focus sharpened by the knowledge that Victoria was watching not with judgment, but with genuine appreciation. Throughout the morning, minor challenges arose. A shipment of clothing arrived with missing items. A volunteer misunderstood instructions, and a child became upset over a misplaced toy. Each time, Jack responded with calm problem-solving, empathy, and patience, and Victoria observed with admiration as he handled situations that required both tact and care. She occasionally offered guidance, but largely allowed him to lead, reinforcing her belief in his abilities and integrity. As the day wore on, the initial suspicion from some of the staff who had doubted him in previous days seemed to dissolve, replaced by a growing respect for his consistency and the evident sincerity behind his actions. By late afternoon, as the activities concluded and families departed with gratitude, Victoria led Jack to a small garden adjacent to the center, a quiet space filled with blooming flowers and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. "Jack," she began, her voice soft yet firm, "I wanted to show you not just what we do, but why we do it. Your contributions have not only helped materially, but they have inspired confidence and trust. I believe that is a rare quality." Jack felt a mixture of pride and humility, realizing that the small decisions he made, simple gestures of kindness and attentiveness, had tangible impact far beyond what he had imagined. He looked at Victoria, noting the genuine warmth in her eyes and the subtle smile that acknowledged his efforts without pretense. In that quiet moment, amidst the soft glow of the setting sun, both understood that the connection they were building was rooted in authenticity, mutual respect, and a shared understanding that actions guided by integrity could bridge worlds and create a foundation for trust and deeper connection that neither had anticipated but both were eager to explore. As the sun began to dip behind the skyline, casting the streets in warm golden light. Jack Miller and Victoria Harper walked side by side toward the small gallery that Victoria had arranged to honor local community efforts. The gallery space was intimate, with soft lighting illuminating the walls, each panel displaying photographs, sketches, and personal stories from those who had been touched by the outreach programs. Jack's eyes widened as he took in the scene, realizing that the sketches and photographs included moments he had directly influenced, children he had helped, and families whose smiles he remembered vividly. Victoria noticed his reaction and led him to a centerpiece of the exhibition, a framed sketchbook open to a page filled with vibrant drawings and handwritten notes. "I want to show you the impact of your actions," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and tenderness. Jack leaned closer, recognizing familiar faces and events captured in the pages, his heart swelling with a mixture of surprise and humility. "This is incredible," he murmured, his fingers hovering over the edge of the frame. "I did not realize that I would be part of this." Victoria smiled, taking his hand gently in hers. "You have been part of this all along, Jack. Your genuine care and effort have left a mark far beyond what you see in your daily life. I wanted you to know that you are valued, not for who I am or the resources I can provide, but for the person you are and the kindness you show." The gallery was quiet except for the soft footfalls of visitors moving through the space, reading plaques, and pausing to study each display. Jack felt a profound connection not only to the work, but to Victoria herself, realizing that the admiration in her eyes was genuine and not influenced by social expectation. As they walked through the exhibition, Victoria shared anecdotes about how each piece had come to be, emphasizing the resilience, hope, and gratitude of the people whose stories were captured. Jack listened intently, absorbing every detail. The warmth of the gallery and the recognition of his contributions stirring a deep sense of accomplishment. They paused in front of a section dedicated to the first outreach program, where sketches of the bridge encounter were displayed. Jack's gaze lingered on the images, recalling the rain, the flat tire, and the moment he had extended his hands to help her. It struck him how a simple act of assistance had cascaded into a ripple of positive change, connecting them and touching countless lives in ways he had never anticipated. Victoria looked at him, her eyes soft yet intense. "Jack, I want you to know that your integrity and heart are what matter most. This gallery is a celebration not of wealth or status, but of actions that come from genuine care. I could not have asked for a better partner to share this journey with." Jack swallowed, emotion welling up, and he realized that the feelings he had been harboring for Victoria were reciprocated and grounded in something deeper than circumstance or fortune. The gallery had become a testament to shared values, a tangible representation of connection and trust, and in that moment, Jack felt a clarity he had never experienced before. As the evening progressed, visitors departed, leaving the two of them alone amidst the soft glow of the lights and the quiet hum of the city outside. Victoria turned to him, her hand brushing against his, a silent invitation that needed no words. Jack met her gaze, understanding fully that the journey they had begun on the rainy bridge had reached a pivotal moment. The sketches, the photographs, and the stories surrounding them were not merely artifacts. They were symbols of impact, trust, and the bond forming between them. In the gentle silence of the gallery, with the city lights twinkling through the windows, they stood together, the unspoken promise of connection, respect, and the possibility of love hanging in the air, marking the culmination of shared effort and the beginning of a new chapter in their intertwined lives. As the evening settled over the city, Jack Miller and Victoria Harper walked side by side toward the rooftop terrace of the gallery, the sky painted in warm shades of orange and pink as the sun set behind the distant skyline. The lights of the city began to twinkle below, reflecting off glass windows and casting a gentle glow on the streets. Jack carried the sketchbook carefully, a symbol of the journey they had shared and the impact of his actions, while Victoria walked with a serene smile, her presence calm yet vibrant, radiating the warmth he had come to trust. They reached the center of the terrace, where a small table had been set with 2 cups of tea and a single candle flickering in the soft evening breeze. Victoria turned to him, her eyes searching his, conveying a mixture of anticipation, trust, and the quiet hope that had grown between them over the past days. "Jack," she said softly, "you have shown me that true kindness and integrity are rare qualities. You acted without expectation, without consideration for status or wealth, and that has made all the difference." Jack felt a swell of emotion rise in his chest, the weight of her words affirming everything he had felt but had not yet fully understood. He placed the sketchbook on the table, opening it to the page that contained the drawing of the bridge where their story had begun, the first act of connection that had sparked everything that followed. "Victoria, I did what anyone would do," he said quietly, but knowing that it mattered, knowing that it reached you in a way that changed things, that is more than I could have imagined. She stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his. "It is not about the act alone, Jack. It is about the heart behind it. I have seen the way you care, the way you act, even when no one is watching. That is why I wanted to share this moment with you." Jack's gaze met hers fully, and in that instant he understood the depth of their connection. The bond formed not from circumstance or wealth, but from mutual respect, shared experiences, and the recognition of character. Slowly, deliberately, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key, the metal catching the last rays of sunlight. He placed it on the table, letting it rest beside the sketchbook. "Victoria, I want to continue this journey with you, not because of what I hope to gain, but because of who we have become together through these moments. Will you allow me to stand by your side, not as someone who sees your wealth or title, but as someone who values you for everything else?" Her eyes glistened with a mixture of surprise, joy, and quiet emotion. She reached for the key and held it gently in her hand, turning to him with a soft, heartfelt smile. "Jack, I accept. I value the person you are, and I welcome you fully into this part of my life and into whatever comes next for us." They stood together on the terrace, the cityscape stretching infinitely behind them, the sketchbook and key resting on the table as symbols of their journey, of trust and shared experience. In the quiet that followed, the air filled with the soft sounds of distant traffic and the gentle rustle of leaves, they embraced, a promise unspoken yet fully understood. Their story, which had begun with a rainy night on a bridge and a simple act of kindness, had reached a point of clarity and fulfillment, a resolution built on honesty, empathy, and the profound recognition that love and connection transcend social boundaries. As the city lights shimmered around them, Jack and Victoria held each other, knowing that their lives had been irrevocably changed and that the next chapter would be written together, guided by the same values that had brought them to this moment.